In the quiet moments between the noise of the world and the silence of the self, something profound begins to stir. It is not always comfortable. In fact, it rarely is. But within that space of solitude where the distractions fall away, the soul begins to speak, and when it does, we discover a paradox that modern life tends to obscure, that true freedom does not always look like connection, noise, or constant engagement. Sometimes it looks like stillness, like distance, like choosing to be alone. Fernando Pessoa once wrote, "Freedom is the possibility of isolation, not the sentence of isolation, the possibility," a subtle but essential distinction. He wasn't advocating loneliness nor celebrating the kind of disconnection that stems from bitterness or withdrawal. He was pointing to something deeper, a kind of inner sovereignty, a space within where no one else can enter, where one's truth is untouched by the demands of the crowd. Most people fear solitude not because they don't enjoy being alone, but because in solitude we are confronted with ourselves. No masks, no mirrors, no distractions, just the raw presence of being. And that can be terrifying, because in the absence of noise, we begin to hear all that we've buried, the doubts, the dreams we've abandoned, the parts of us we've edited to fit into a world that rarely accepts wholeness. But here lies the secret. What we fear is also what can set us free. When we learn to dwell in our own presence, we stop needing others to validate our existence. We begin to see that freedom is not the absence of responsibility or the ability to do whatever we want, but the capacity to be with ourselves without fleeing. And that kind of freedom is indestructible. No one can take it, because it isn't given from the outside. It's claimed from within. In isolation, we begin to notice what truly nourishes us. What thoughts arise when no one is watching? What values remain when we're not trying to please? What kind of life calls us, not because it's trending or praised, but because it resonates with something ancient and real inside of us? To be free is to no longer need to explain ourselves. It is to choose silence not as a retreat, but as a return to clarity, to peace, to truth. And like Pessoa suggests, that return is only possible when we are willing to walk alone, not forever, but long enough to hear our own voice. There is a strange discomfort that arises when we are left alone with ourselves, a twitch of restlessness, an urge to reach for our phones, turn on some background noise, message someone, anyone. It's as if we are addicted to the presence of others, not because we need them, but because we've forgotten how to be with ourselves. But the soul is not noisy. It speaks in whispers. It waits in stillness. It doesn't compete with the voices of the world. It retreats into the background until we are ready to listen, and most never are. We run from ourselves, filling the hours with entertainment, obligations, and conversation. Anything but silence. Anything but solitude. Yet those who have truly touched freedom, inner freedom, speak of something very different. They describe a kind of spaciousness inside, a place untouched by the world's demands. They do not fear isolation. They welcome it, because in isolation, they meet the unedited version of themselves. And that self may be vulnerable, fractured, even uncertain, but it is real. We are taught that freedom lies in options, in choosing between this or that, going here or there, being this or that. But what if freedom is not about the ability to choose externally, but the courage to remain internally? What if the real chains are not societal but psychological, forged from our own compulsions, our need to be seen, liked, validated? Pessoa's insight is radical precisely because it reverses the direction of freedom. It's not about moving outward, but inward. Not about gaining more, but shedding. Shedding the need to impress. Shedding the fear of judgment. Shedding the constant performing that modern life demands. And the result? A kind of liberation so profound it feels like coming home. Not to a house or a city or a person, but to yourself. When you can sit in a room alone without reaching for escape and feel whole, then you are free, not dependent on praise, not ruled by loneliness, not haunted by silence, but alive in your own presence. This kind of solitude is not a punishment. It is a practice, a discipline of depth. And like all things that matter, it requires time, patience, and a willingness to be uncomfortable. But what lies on the other side is not isolation in the negative sense. It's clarity, it's grounding, it's truth. Solitude, when embraced rather than feared, becomes a mirror. It shows us who we are beneath the layers, not who we pretend to be, not who the world expects, but who we've always been, quietly waiting under the noise. And in that mirror, we often see contradictions, strength and fragility, desires and doubts, shadows we've denied and dreams we've postponed. It's all there, the full, uncomfortable truth of our inner landscape. No filters, no audience, just being. Many turn away from this mirror. It's easier to stay distracted, to fill our days with movement and noise. But distraction is not peace. It's not freedom. It's sedation. It numbs the longing, but it doesn't heal it. True freedom requires honesty, and honesty begins in silence. Not the silence of an empty room, but the deeper silence, the kind that exists when the mind stops performing, when there's no one to impress, no identity to maintain, just breathe, just presence. We spend much of our lives trying to belong, to groups, to ideologies, to roles that promise us meaning. But in this pursuit, we often abandon the one relationship that matters most, the one with ourselves. We look for mirrors in other people, hoping they'll reflect something we like. But external validation is a poor substitute for internal clarity. The paradox is this: only when we can be alone, truly alone, can we begin to connect authentically with others, not out of need or emptiness, but from fullness, from choice, from peace. That kind of connection is no longer driven by fear of abandonment or fear of not being enough. It's driven by stillness and by love that is not needy but free. So solitude is not about retreating from life. It's about preparing to meet life more clearly, more bravely. When you've sat with your own mind, faced your own fears, befriended your own silence, you become unshakable. Not because you have hardened, but because you have softened in the right places. And what remains is not a fragile self, but a grounded one. There comes a point in the journey inward where silence no longer feels empty but full, where being alone is not loneliness, but sanctuary, and where freedom is not escape, but return to the self that has always been quietly observing, patiently waiting beneath the noise. In this stillness, we discover something radical. We are enough, without applause, without recognition, without constant stimulation or external meaning. We realize that the essence of who we are does not need justification, only space. And that space is found in solitude. Fernando Pessoa, a man who knew deeply the vast interior landscapes of the soul, once wrote, "To be great, be whole, exclude nothing, exaggerate nothing that is not you. Be whole in everything. Put all you are into the smallest thing you do." It's a call to integrity, not the moral kind, but the spiritual one. The integrity of presence, of being so rooted in yourself that even your smallest gestures are authentic. But such wholeness can only emerge when the noise of the world is turned down, when you step away from the stage, remove the masks, and sit quietly with the self beneath all roles. Then, and only then, does true freedom appear. Not the freedom to do whatever you want, but the freedom to be exactly who you are. That is the paradox Pessoa invites us into. Isolation, when chosen with awareness, is not exile. It is liberation. It is clarity. It is the sacred silence where the soul learns to speak again. And perhaps in that deep stillness, we no longer fear the world, because we've finally stopped fearing ourselves.